Welcome to today's Daytime Dialogues. It's my extreme pleasure to welcome Dr. Norman Blumanthal. Dr. Blumenthal is the Education Director of the Wexner Kollel Elyon and the Smicha Honors Program at REITs at Yeshiva University. He's a clinical psychologist with a private practice in Lawrence, New York. And he's also the Director of Bereavement and Crisis Intervention Services at Chai Lifeline, among other things that he does.
No, not Chai Lifeline, no.
No, no.
For years.
Oh, I apologize.
OHEL. Yeah.
For OHEL, I'm sorry, for OHEL.
OHEL.
For OHEL. And I thank him for joining us today, and especially since he is one of those people in our community who is called upon on a very regular basis before we hit pandemic for really helping us figure out really tough situations. And now during the pandemic, I can't even begin to imagine how many consultations he has been doing as in addition to the regular therapy. So thank you, Dr. Blumenthal, for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me. So, I miss Chicago.
Well, we miss having you in Chicago, especially today when it snowed.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
But it was the first time.
Okay.
I really, let me just start out with unfortunately some of the tough issues. And the issue, the one which really has me questioning is when we come back. You know, we are in hopefully the final stages of this pandemic, even though predictions may be that, God forbid, it will be worse in the coming month or two. But we've been suffering with this for a year. And there are children who have been stuck at home, children who have been hearing about all of the tragedies around them, and children who've been in school but masked. What do you think is going to happen when things begin to reopen? How do you think kids are going to be able to overcome the resilience, lack of resilience? It's a long question, but
it's a big question.
Yeah.
I might reflect some New York chauvinism and quote our local philosopher and theologian, Yogi Berra. Two quotes. One was, "It ain't over till it's over." So we're not over yet, but also predicting is very difficult, especially about the future. So it is hard to predict. I do think we're going to come out of this different. I think not only our children, but all of us, and we should. You know, one of the ways of coping with trauma or crises is what's often referred to as post-traumatic growth. That if we somehow come out better people, if we somehow learn from it, then it chips away from some of the pain and the seeming senselessness of all that we've been going through. So my best guess is, and the little I'm seeing right now is I think we're humbled. We're used to, especially in the age of technology, to getting answers to everything. And I think there's been sort of a natural assumption we can lick and we can tackle anything. And now there's this invisible virus all over the world that has even the greatest experts confounded. So I think we'll have a better understanding maybe of illness, et cetera. You're about to say something, Rabbi.
No, I was going to say, you know, if I look at, but to go back to Yogi Berra for a moment, who is my favorite philosopher, he also said that if you get up in the morning, you don't know where you're going, you may not get there.
Right.
So we do need some kind of direction. So humility is one.
Right. Yeah.
We may have a greater humility. Will relationships change?
Well, I think we're going to have a greater appreciation for relationships. I know, again, there's that terrible term, taking things for granted, and having been wrenched apart from family members, from loved ones, from friends, from community. Even though, I mean, we are getting together with distancing and masks, but it's certainly not the same. I think we're going to have a greater appreciation for interpersonal contact. We're not going to take those kinds of opportunities for granted. I think we'll be probably better understanding illness and safety precautions, hygiene, etc. I think it'll linger. And maybe that's even advantageous. Maybe we just felt too invincible. Yes, right.
No, I'm still thinking about this. So unfortunately, we learn difficult lessons in life in all different kinds of circumstances. And then at some point, they seem to start disappearing and things go back to the way they were. So the first time I'll be able to hug a grandchild will be exceptional. And maybe the second time and the third time. But I would imagine at some point it goes back. Do you think there are going to be really lasting changes?
So that's a great question. It's interesting, the research on post 9/11, and I don't remember the exact statistics, but I'm going to give a rough guesstimate that survivors of 9/11 and even the surrounding community, a large percentage said that how they're going to do things differently, what they're going to have a greater appreciation for. I think it was up somewhere in the vicinity of 80, 90%. But 6 months later, it slipped down to about 30, 40%. So there is a tendency for us to be very, I mean, look, we're all very inspired, Neela, Yom Kippur, and then we daven probably the most quick and slipshot Marav ever. So it is human nature, but that's the work, I think. I think the job, our job, and maybe the job of those of us, maybe like yourself and me, who are in positions of working with people and giving over messages, that we should try not to. We should try to cull from this and grow from it.
So if you had one thing that you wanted to tell the Smicha students and YU that they have to work on, or tell me, what would be the one thing that we should really work on moving forward?
So for me personally, and I think it's relevant, as I said, I think maybe that's why it's the first thing I said, it's humbling. It's a very easy in today's world to feel very confident and very full of ourselves. Look what we can do. Look how we can have a conversation hundreds, thousands of miles apart as if we're face to face. I think technology has induced in us a certain sense of being invincible, grandiose. And we know, as, and certainly you know better than I do, as from a religious perspective, how dangerous that is. And so for me personally, and I think for many of us, it is a humbling experience. So I hope we take that with us. I hope we're going to take with us how important those little, seemingly trivial interpersonal connections are. How important it is to smile at your spouse, at your children when the first time you see them. How important it is to say thank you, or the hugs, as you said. We didn't have them for a very long time. And when you don't have something, you appreciate it all the more.
So how do you teach somebody to continue to do it? Is it just you keep on reminding them, or is there something, is there exercise? Is there something we need to do to be more humble?
Well, we have it in our calendar. We have Tisha B'Av. So we're not going to forget the Churban, and we're not going to forget that we're in Galut. We work it into our liturgy, our calendar, and I'm hoping we're going to do the same with this experience. That we're gonna work it into our. We're not going to live in it, but we're going to remember it. We're going to take it with us. So not that we'll continue to feel like we're being separated and vulnerable as we do now, but that we revisit it from time to time and remind ourselves of what lessons we can learn from it.
And in terms of populations during this pandemic, who are the emotionally, psychologically, who are the most at risk? Were they the children? Are they people who are alone, the elderly? Is there a group that's more at risk than someone else that we think we're going to have to work with more after we come out?
Okay, so that's a great question. I mean, obviously the elderly, who are, especially those who are alone, it's been terrible. A lot of the calls we're getting at OL are from people who are feeling so isolated, even if, and not at home with necessarily with the internet and with virtual connections as some of the younger people are. So they certainly have suffered disproportionately. The long haulers, which is such a big question mark, because we ran a group at OHIL for people who have survived COVID. And unexpectedly, there was a way disproportionate number of people who joined the group who have lingering symptoms and illnesses, some of them quite severe, all linked to the virus. So there's a question that those people, you know, are those symptoms going to remit? Is it going to be chronic and lifelong? The diabetes, the alopecia, the various blood disorders, the anxiety. We're seeing people that never had anxiety before have near crippling anxiety. You can say something, Rabbi.
No, I'm not. I'm listening.
Oh, okay. The stance we've been taking, and I think this is a good way of sort of putting it during crisis like this, is that what has been will be more. So weaknesses or fragility will be greater, but strengths will also be greater. And that's what we're seeing. So that part of our lives, people who had pre-existing psychiatric conditions, whether I'm not talking about severe ones, say even anxiety, depression, well within the rubric of what you can treat, those that have come back or been exacerbated, obsessive compulsive disorders, people who have got a handle on it, but now during the pandemic, it's coming out. So we're seeing our weaknesses, relationships, people who are not necessarily in problematic relationships, but relationships with some areas that need some work or that cause some tension, that are mitigated by the fact that we're not on top of each other all day. But now suddenly when we're cooped up together in the house, come out, whether it's sibling, marital, parent-child relationships. So that we're seeing. But again, we're seeing the strengths too. We're seeing people capable of supporting one another, doing it all the more so people who have various types of resilience. The resilience is even greater.
And have you seen any research or any explanation that explains why people uh, seem to ignore safety precautions? And it crosses boundaries. Sometimes people want to say it's in the right-wing community more than in the center community, but the center community is on vacation now in many places. You know, so it seems to be everywhere, maybe in different experiences. How do people, why is it that people can just say, this is okay, I'm doing it?
So I'm not sure of any research I can tell you in terms of my own personal observations, having been very busy with this. I think there's a psychological concept called cognitive dissonance. It's a whole area in psychology. But basically what it means is that if you have a belief, you take a position about something and the consequences are great, and it's a position you're not sure of, then you're going to become all the more fanatical about it. And therefore, when you see situations where, it's the mask wearers versus the non-mask wearers, and maybe we're seeing it more in New York because we're such a big community that we can afford to have different factions. And people are so passionate about it. Sometimes I look and I say, what are you getting so emotional about it? Well, look at the consequences. If those of us, I count myself among them, who have been taking the precautions very seriously, if I've gone through all this hardship and sacrifice and difficulty, and I didn't need to, that's going to be a very hard idea for me to come to terms with. But then if I look at the other end, the people who've been more lax and dismissive about these safety measures, and they have to face the fact that maybe they caused other people to be sick or one to die, how can they live with that? So they have to become more radical with their position. So I think that the way we've become radicalized is because we're dealing with situations that have very pronounced consequences and no certainty, because there's a lot of things we don't understand.
So it's once someone starts a position, then they sort of get caught into this cycle and it grows and expands?
Yeah. For example, there was when they were doing studies in cognitive dissonance a number of years ago, I think it was the University of Michigan, again, I don't have my material at my fingertips, found out about a cult that lived on a mountaintop somewhere in the West that believed that the world was going to be destroyed and they're going to be rescued by space aliens. And they wanted to see what would happen when that day comes and it doesn't happen. So they infiltrated the cult. They wrote a book called When Prophecy Fails. And what they found was that day came, they were all packed and ready, no space aliens came. So the elders said that the space aliens spared the earth because they were so frum and they were so good. So now we have to proselytize. Now I have to go out and try to get more ready. They said again, when your position is challenged and you really believe in it, you're going to go to great extremes to endorse it. And I think that's why this has become something, where people almost come to blows over this, issue of safety, not safety, because look at what's at stake, and we don't know for sure.
I want to shift for a minute to one of your other hats, the hat that you wear at Yeshiva University. When I went to Yeshiva, I was in Chicago, so it's a Yeshiva. You're in Yeshiva. When I was
we used to tease you guys. Yeshiva.
Well, we're in Yeshiva.
And you drink pop.
Now you have it.
Right.
When I was in the Yeshiva and I was in Smicha, we had something called practical rabbinics. It was once a week a class. And for us, practical rabbinics was, okay, how do you make a bikur cholim call? Don't sit on the hospital bed. How do you read a ksuva? Well, practice it so you don't break your teeth. It was very practical things that were job related. We didn't have a therapist working with us to try to train us. And I have a feeling in yeshiva, if I went back to my cohort, they also didn't.
Right.
What's changed that in part of the training of the Rabbonim, and especially in the honors and the Elyon, that you're there?
Right. Well, not only mine and many others. In fact, Rabbi Penner has significantly extended this training where actually therapists meet with the students and help them become more sort of sensitized and aware of their own responses as they face many complications and difficulties. I think it's a change in society, and it's a change in the understanding of the role of the rabbi. The change in society has been that as we become increasingly aware of emotional vulnerabilities, and maybe even that we become weaker, which I don't think is such a terrible thing to say. As life progresses, as there's more progression in technology and what we can accomplish, we do become weaker. I'm sure our grandparents were weaker than their grandparents as life became simpler. So as we become more vulnerable, there's the role of the mental health professional isn't, used to be just to treat mental illness. Now our role is maybe to treat some of the more severe mental illness, but some of the more areas of emotional vulnerability, we're deputizing other people to help out. At OHIL, we're involved in 40 some schools where we've trained them in anxiety. We train teachers how to recognize anxiety and how to treat a modicum of anxiety and know when to refer to a mental health professional. This would have been unheard of 10 years ago. But many professionals now are becoming, as I said, deputized mental health professionals, and the rabbi as well. The rabbi, I'm sure you know, is probably spending more of his day, that's what I hear from some of our graduates, involved in counseling and helping people with life struggles than they are making halachic decisions. So I think the role of the rabbi, let's say the Leo Youngs of back, the austere rabbi with the top hat, who spoke from the pulpit and shook you to to your core, but didn't get so personally involved in your life, was appropriate then, is not the rabbi of today. And many, in fact, it's interesting, we've even seen among our graduates that sometimes when they're applying for jobs in the community will opt for the more social, engaging rabbinic candidate than necessarily the most erudite, because they're not looking for that as much as they used to, and they're looking for someone that they can come to when their child may be texting on Shabbos or something like that.
And is that, I'm finding it fascinating. So for instance, in school, I hear the claim of stress much more than I remember when I was in school.
Mm-hmm.
Is it that really people are naturally more stressed or vulnerable to stress, or is it because we put more stresses on? Is it that there's a weakness? Is there a weakening of people, or is it that the world has gotten more complicated? We're the same.
So there's a lot of speculation why there's such a dramatic increase in anxiety. Anxiety is the most common, relief resources will tell us that anxiety is the most common referral in the Orthodox community, and of course in the general community as well. It's the third most common referral for children, but also data shows dramatic increases in anxiety among children. My own belief is that it's specifically because of how much easier life has gotten. Because life has gotten so much easier and so much safer and so much more accommodating, we're not developing the same coping skills that we had in the past. And therefore, with the absence of those greater coping skills, and being so used to everything being so perfect. Today we can sit on our phone and wire and program our house to be the perfect heat and have the windows open and closed before we even get home. Because it's gotten so easy, we don't have the same sort of resilience and strength. And then when something doesn't go away, such as COVID-19, the reaction is more severe because we don't have those coping mechanisms. And what we're doing for schools right now is we're actually teaching coping skills, which you never would have done. Certainly when I went to school, that when you went to school, it's unheard of. Yeah.
I always thought that, I'll give you an example from high school, that part of the reason of the greater stress is that when I went to school, well, the assumption was we were going to be staying local. We weren't looking for the Ivy Leagues. We were going to go to college. And then if we went beyond college, we went beyond college, et cetera. It wasn't nowadays.
It's true.
To try to get into those colleges, it's a lot more. So I thought it was externally, we've made it more stressful. What you're suggesting is externally, we've made it easier, which makes us more vulnerable.
Well, what we've made harder, and that's also why people say this address, is that it's much easier to compare ourselves to others because of social media. So whatever you did in high school, maybe your buddies knew, and hopefully your parents didn't know, or they did know if it was good. It was a good news. But
so let's say she did.
Yeah. Okay. So I remember meeting your mother. Yes. So it was a much smaller circle. Today, let's say a kid comes, there's a final and grades come back. The child's going to go on social media, and the whole class and the whole community is going to know. So we're comparing ourselves more. There's more, and therefore we're seeing more of this what we call perfectionism, pressure to be exceptionally good and to be exceptional. So I think there is some of that addition. I think that's valid as well. There, and therefore, if the competition is greater and the comparisons are greater, then of course there is more stress in that respect.
So it sounds like it's a perfect storm.
Well, I'm not a hand wringer. I don't like to say, oh, the good old days. Life changes. And the problem is we're always we're always playing catch up. So reality changes, and then the same thing with this pandemic, and then we have to scurry about and try to catch up. So the world has changed, and we're going to adjust and adapt to it. And just about when we've adjusted and adapt to it, there'll be another change that we have to play catch up to. That's the way the world is.
And in terms of social media, and are things, is there a hope that things will ever get normal again with that, or is that just the reality of the new world, that everyone knows what everyone else is doing?
No, I think we'll adapt to it. We'll adjust to it. I don't look. We have to contain it. I mean, it's obviously can get out of hand, and they're dangerous. We just had a very heart-wrenching suicide in the New York area that got a lot of publicity, and we know that there's a contagion, and so therefore somebody puts a suicide note on their on Instagram or Snapchat, and everybody's reading it. So we have to learn how to contain it, but we also have to learn how to live with it and manage it. And I'm sure when the car was first invented, people were scared to produce it because it's dangerous. You can have car crashes, pedestrian accidents, and the response was, let's produce the car and learn how to safely use it. I think the same thing is going to be happening with this. We're going to learn to live with social media. We're going to master it and take the necessary precautions. And I said, and by just about time when we do it, there'll be something new. I can't even imagine what, but there will be some new unthinkable device or capacity that we'll have to figure out how to manage.
And I'm going to shift again. This morning I was in a meeting with some of the leadership of Mizrahi Olami, the world Mizrahi, and we were talking about the Year in Israel experience. And there were about 2,500 students coming from, for lack of any better term, the modern Orthodox world every year to Israel. Right. Spending a year there. And it's not, and one of my complaints, and I've voiced this in a number of different places already, is that it's no longer the Year in Israel, it's now the gap year. It's become a year a little bit that's off of your intent. When I went to Israel, you were trying to get into the best yeshiva you could get into, or even the best hachshara program you could get into, but there was an opportunity you were looking for, and now we're looking to relax a little bit. And the challenge I was given to that was that isn't the biggest issue, it's WhatsApp. That there is a connectedness back to the States, which doesn't allow the experience to take effect. If you don't have that immersion anymore in Israel as you once had. Have you seen changes with kids when they're going to Israel, when they're coming back from Israel?
So I think it's true. I think that the year in Israel was the year, quote unquote, flip. The year to really make some significant. I mean, some kids actually went the other way, and Israel has its risks as well. And I'm not seeing that as much. And I do think it has a lot to do with the fact that you're not as sequestered when you go to a foreign country as it used to be. I mean, sure, you and I can still remember when you had to go to the post office in Rehov Yafo and go into that booth to make a phone call home, and you couldn't hear a thing anyway, and spend $40 doing it, So I do think, but again, I'm going to go back to what I said before. We can't turn the clock back. the world is changing. So the year in Israel is going to be different. And I think instead of bemoaning the fact that it's not what it used to be, is how can we maximally benefit? How can we help the students maximally benefit from it when it is not as completely disconnected? Not by the way, not only WhatsApp, but going back and forth, like coming in for every upsharing and every they need a dental visit, so they come back. This back and forth that has become so facilitated has also taken away from that immersion in Israel. But the world is shrinking, and that's part of the experience. I mean, we see that again with the pandemic, because that's why it's spreading like this, is because people just travel so much.
And we're coming up to the end of our time, so I just want to look on a positive side.
Okay.
If you were giving some advice to parents today, let's say parents of elementary school or younger children, what would be the best advice you'd give them in terms of managing the next few months until things begin to turn the corner in a real way? What's the best way to keep families healthy?
Well, I think we have to pat ourselves on the back, because we focus. We have a tendency to focus on the negative. I like, again, I'll quote another great philosopher from baseball, Vince Scully, the legendary announcer for the Brooklyn Dodgers, who once said that losing feels more bad than winning feels good. We are more impacted by the negative, but there's a lot of positive that has come out of this. For one thing, I think the humor has been amazing. We're all getting the jokes and the cartoons and the use of humor to endure a difficult situation. Some of the ways in which parents have and teachers have found ways to entertain or engage the children remotely, or when quarantined, how to come up from within the home, scavenger hunts, bonfires, all sorts of interesting ways in which the creativity that has gone into making the stay at home meaningful is something I think we can take with us. The other thing that a lot of people are talking about, and I think it's true, is the role of Zoom and remote connections. We're perfecting it. It's still, we have a while to go, and the data on education via remotely has not been very promising, especially for some of the more vulnerable population. But we are doing a lot better with it, and I think it'll be part of our lives even when this is over, which could be an enhancement. Like, again, you mentioned snow today. They say there's not going to be any more snow days, because when it snows, we'll just Zoom,
Yeah, I'm not sure. I actually gave a snow day to the kids without any snow, because we had a plan. They needed one extra day off for a long weekend, the first weekend of Hanukkah. So we're having a snow.
Okay.
But I'm also a big believer that sometimes, even though we can be in touch, sometimes it's also better to let the kids disconnect for a bit. And when school, give them that day off. Let them rejoice a little bit and roll around in the snow a little bit. So
I have a friend who once said to his kid, "You know what? We're going to play hooky today." And he said, "I'd love to, Dad. I don't know how to play." He said, "Good, I'll show you." But anyway, go ahead. I'm sorry. Right.
No, it's something we had perfected in our generation. But,
okay.
So just as simple as some of the positive psychology people talking about at the table, what was fun, what do we do good, those kinds of things.
Yeah, sure. There's a very interesting new book out. I'm in the middle of reading it, so I guess it's on my mind. I'm sure you know that there's been a lot of focus on gratitude,
right? And
how people who express gratitude are so much, are live longer and are healthier and are happier, have better relationships, and which we say modem 3 times a day. We have that built in again into our liturgy. But this person, Steno is his name. David Steno, he has shown research that shows that when you have gratitude, it gives you better self-restraint and self-control. It's fascinating. You usually think about self-control and self-restraint as strong, resisting. But he says that his point is that when you are aware of what to be grateful for, then you have an easy time delaying gratification and saying the world is good, so I don't have to have that delicious piece of chocolate cake right now. I can hold off on it and watch my weight. So yes, being grateful for what we have and what we can do is a very important part of even self-restraint.
So I'm grateful for your 30 minutes that you gave
Oh,
us.
thank you.
Half hour,
Thank
because
you.
it was fascinating. I
Okay.
thank you again, but on behalf of all of us, the Amcha, I want to also thank you for the leadership you've shown in this and in other very, very difficult situations, because
Okay.
your good humor, your expertise, and your wisdom has made a difference for Klal Yisrael and for the American Jewish scene without
Okay.
question.
Thank
So
you. Thank you
no,
for the opportunity. Right.
it's thank
Uh-huh.
you, and I look forward to schmoozing with you in the future. And I thank you again
My
for joining
pleasure.
us today.
Okay. My
Bye-bye.
pleasure. Thank you, Rabbi. Okay. All the best.
Very
Okay.
much.
Bye-bye.